The extraordinary thing about the Battle of Shrewsbury is not just that Henry V got hit by this arrow, but that he didn't leave. He stayed on and he fought. This wretched arrow stuck in his face.
At the Glasgow Digital Design Studio in Scotland, eminent neurosurgeon Ian Sabin has for the first time recreated this wound on a virtual Prince Hal.
The arrowhead involved was a bodkin, which was designed to be armor-piercing, and as such would have punched its way through the tissues almost surgically. Potentially structures that were damaged include a nerve that exits just under the eye, called the infraorbital nerve, which gives feeling to the cheek, which would have left him with a numb cheek. It would then have penetrated the thin bone of the maxillary air sinus, which is an air-filled cavity within the skull, and punched its way through the nose, before ending up in this area, close to the jawbone or mandible, and very close to the carotid arteries.
At a scale of over 1,000%, Ian is now able to map in 3 dimensions how perilously close the prince came to death.
So if we now remove the facial skeleton to show the arrow track more clearly, we can see just how close potentially it came to structures that would have led to fairly rapid death. The jugular vein, the main draining vein from the brain, and the carotid arteries, the main arteries leading to the brain and to the facial muscles. In addition, very close also is the spinal cord and the brainstem, injury to which would have been instantly fatal.
The prince was taken to Kenilworth Castle in the heart of England. Its ghostly remains still stand. His attendants carefully tried to remove the arrow, but then, disaster. The arrow breaks. Now the prince has a bodkin arrowhead lodged 6 inches inside his skull. How will they get it out? And who in all the kingdom has the skill to do it? The prince's advisors chose John Bradmore, a surgeon, locksmith, and convicted coin forger, for the challenge of a lifetime.
You've got to imagine that Bradmore was in a unique situation. For the start, that he was in prison for counterfeiting, which was quite a serious offence, and he had been dragged out of prison, brought up to Kenilworth and said, right, here's the situation, you've got the future King of England, he's got an arrowhead in his head, we want you to get it out.
Just hours out of prison, John Bradmore hatched an incredible plan. He decided to forge a new surgical instrument armed with nothing but a hammer and several sheets of molten metal. Historical blacksmith Hector Cole is reconstructing John Bradmore's arrow extractor, using the same techniques Bradmore himself would have used over 600 years earlier.
What John Bradmore would have had to have done first would to forge out the strip of metal to make the main body of the extractor, and I've done that, and I've thinned out the 2 ends so that they are the right thickness to be able to put the flutes in, to make it into a half a cylinder at each end, because when the 2 come together they make a complete tube to enter the wound where the arrow went into Prince Henry's head.
While John Bradmore worked, hour by hour, fever and infection pushed the prince ever closer to death.
Time was of the essence, obviously, and he didn't have a lot of time to make it. He would have had perhaps a day and a half at the most to work out how to do it, how to make it, and actually make it. So he was under a tremendous amount of pressure.
The arrow shaft had completely broken off inside the prince's skull. Fortunately, the remaining arrowhead was hollow, and this was to prove a crucial detail.
This extractor has to enter through the wound, locate into the socket of the arrowhead, and the clever part of it is it expands inside the socket, so it's not going to do any more damage to the future King of England. It grips the arrowhead tight, and then a little bit of the wriggle, and out it comes.
6 centuries after John Bradmore forged his instrument, the Ancient Discoveries team are putting it to the test. Using state-of-the-art virtual technology, they are going to recreate the operation that saved the English prince. The question is, how did the future king survive? July 1403. At Kenilworth Castle, the future King of England lay dying, with an arrow lodged 6 inches inside his skull. How he survived has remained a medical mystery for 6 centuries. At the Ancient Discoveries Test Center, our team are recreating Prince Hal's wound on a pig carcass. Using a 15th century longbow, an arrow is fired at 200 miles per hour into the carcass. Now, top surgeon Mike Edwards is investigating how our extractor can be used to remove the arrowhead.
This is a pig carcass we're dealing with, of course, but we've got to draw some similarities between this and a wound in a human being. This is a big problem to treat because it's in such deep tissue and I can't see the other side of it. What I have to think about is, if I'm going to take out this arrow, what structures are going to be in the way to stop me doing that? Because, especially in the face, there are vital structures that must not be damaged.
Mike's challenge is made more difficult because we know that during surgery, the arrow shaft was broken off, leaving the iron arrowhead deep inside the 6-inch wound.
Now, as you can see, we've taken out the shaft of the arrow, but there's no arrowhead on it. And of course, this must be buried within the wound. Now, John Bradmore knows that there's an arrowhead lodged in there somewhere and he's got to get it out. This is where we test whether or not this implement, made in 1403, is going to be able to take out this arrowhead.
Over 600 years ago, Prince Hal would have had to endure his skull surgery without any form of anesthetic.
The original account says that this wasn't a straightforward procedure. So I'm going to have to be lucky for it to work first time. And it hasn't. I think if I were doing this to Prince Hal right now as John Bradmore, my career would be on the line. Probably my head would be on the line. What I've got to do is just see whether I'm anywhere near the head of the arrow. Ah, I think that's it. Something's engaged. The question is, has it been enough? I'll just tighten the whole thing way down. Oh, joy.
Mike's success came only after much trial and error, and it thus poses a further riddle. How did the prince survive such an invasive procedure? To discover this, the team need the technology of the future to look inside Prince Hal's head. At the Glasgow Digital Design Studio in Scotland, groundbreaking virtual technology may yet crack the riddle of the prince who should never have become king.
What we've done with Prince Hal has built a three-dimensional model, but in layers, if you will. We've started with outside tissues and worked in three-dimensionally. So we've been able to construct the brain, the skull, all the major systems that are inside our head, and actually understand very clearly where the arrowhead was actually lodged.
The team are setting out to model the Prince Hal story in a 3D virtual space. Every real element is modeled to within 1/25th of an inch.
The way that we would build up a realistic 3D image for the arrow or the extractor would be to make the outline of the item. And then we would use that line to make a set of surfaces. We can then use reference imagery from photographs we've taken, which we can then project onto the surfaces that we've created from those very basic lines, and we end up with what looks like a very realistic end product.
All of the virtual elements are now in place. Neurosurgeon Ian Sabin is about to carry out the first ever virtual operation on a historical figure ever attempted.
We take away the skull and the muscle layer, please.
Okay, we're going into layer selection mode. There you go.
Ian is able to visualize the virtual prints using 3D glasses. Haptic glove technology then allows him to manipulate the prints in a virtual space.
Arrow extractor, please.
Okay, here's the extractor.
The arrow took the only non-fatal trajectory available. It missed the central spinal cord, the brain stem, and the most vital blood vessel in the brain, the carotid artery.
So using Bradmore's extractor, I'm going to pass it along the track that the arrow created, just able to locate it into the socket of the arrowhead, and it appears it's in the right place visually. I can now have a much closer look, which of course Bradmore couldn't do. We can rotate the head and see the tip, and then get a really close view. And that's a view that I've certainly never seen before. That's phenomenal. Just missed the carotid artery. He was that close to death.
At this point, 600 years ago, the prince would have been feverish. His heart rate